Michael K. Williams, who tragically died at the age of 54 on Monday, was best known for his role as Omar on The Wire. But he also was an activist who was genuinely committed to ending mass incarceration, working with organizations like the Innocence Project and the ACLU. One of Williams' most powerful projects was a documentary he made for Vice on HBO called Raised in the System, a series where he embarked on a personal journey to expose the root of America's mass incarceration problem, the juvenile justice system. With me tonight is the award-winning journalist who interviewed Williams about his HBO doc, Lilly Workneh. She also is head of digital content for Rebel Girls. Lilly, so glad to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so like so many, you posted about Michael, a clip of your sit-down interview with him about this project with HBO. So I had to get you on to speak about your first-hand account of the beloved actor. Lilly, you said what stuck with you the most was getting to witness the personal part of Michael's story. Can you tell us more, please?
Absolutely. Well, it was an honor and a privilege really to be in his presence and to see his light fill up this room and to talk about something he was clearly so passionate about. This took place a few years ago when Raised in the System and the documentary he hosted debuted, and it really took a very close look at the root of the mass incarceration issue in America, which starts with juvenile justice and the system that is in place incarcerating kids unjustly. And he hosted this documentary through a really personal lens where he not only spoke to kids who were currently behind bars at the time, but also talked to lawmakers, people in power, judges, and really spoke to people he knew personally, like his nephew, Dominic, who had been incarcerated for 20 years, and Felicia Pearson, who was Snoop in The Wire and had been in and out of the prison system in Baltimore. So to have this really intimate discussion hosted by HBO and the CCNYC, which is a creative collective of Black millennials in New York City, to talk about why he did this and why he's so passionate about addressing policing and issues of incarceration in America was really powerful. And sharing that moment on the day I learned of his passing felt like it was necessary and timely to honor a side of him that I don't think a lot of us always saw, right? We also always knew him to be this really prolific actor who was played in really key roles and expanded the lens in ways we view Black masculinity on screen, but not really we haven't really seen the more activist side of him that is more behind the scenes and sort of quiet and off camera that he didn't put on display like that. And perhaps intentionally. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I think we had a pet issue. Did we lose Lilly?
Apologies. Yes, I am trying to get him together. But yeah,
no worries.
But yeah, that was yeah. Continue.
Lilly, so I'm probably one of the few people who have I'll admit, me and The Wire, I've never watched it. I started getting into it. I'm in season 3, so I know, I get this shocking facial expression from everybody that I tell that to. But so I didn't know about his activism. I didn't know how he advocated against mass incarceration. What were the motivating factors for him for going into the juvenile system and putting a lens on that? Was it because he was also an at-risk youth?
Yeah, I think that played a big part of it. The role he played as Omar Little on The Wire and in many of the other roles he played on screen really drew from his personal experiences, right? Like he grew up in Flatbush Gardens, Brooklyn, in the hood of Brooklyn, raised by a single mother who was an immigrant from Barbados, and was exposed to drug abuse pretty young and early that impacted him in really severe ways, really, traumatic ways, and that he has spent his entire life healing from. And a way I think that he coped with the healing was to portray characters with depth, right? To show his full vulnerability on screen, to be as open and honest and bring integrity to every role that he played, including Omar, which so many of us knew. And I also think, unfortunately, it could have contributed to his demise because he couldn't always separate the characters he played from his craft, right, and from his personal life. And I think he hadn't been as, I think playing those roles was one way of talking about these issues and bringing it to light in a really meaningful, purposeful way. But he did express it, and I went back and read some interviews that he did and really spent some time reflecting on his own story in his own words, where he wished he had done more during the Obama presidency to speak up and take more action. But he didn't let time waste. He did take more action later on, and really through the power of mentorship. Right. And that's what we saw in Raised in the System in the documentary, is that he spoke directly to young kids behind bars and made sure that they had a real life figure. As one of the U.S. has the highest incarceration rate of kids in the world. And to know that statistic and to know that he was a product of an environment that really came from a disadvantaged background, where he didn't feel like he was set up for success, and to break through that, I think he carried that through in everything that he did. And the documentary was a way of him showcasing how he really wanted to give back, right? And he showcased that he never ever forgot where he came from. And there was one statistic in particular in the documentary that showed that that reformed offenders, and although he wasn't a reformed offender himself, that reformed offenders in mentorship roles is one of the most effective ways of reaching at-risk youth, right? And for him to talk to and showcase interviews with people who have been behind bars, who had been released and were giving back to kids in this way, just showed how caring he was and how intentional he was about making this, bringing this to light. And he was a unique personality, or had a unique personality that allowed him to sort of move through these circles with ease, right? Like, he could talk to the kids, he could talk to the reformed offenders, he could talk to the people in power and the politicians to really create conversation and change in ways that no one else really could. So that's deeply admired, and one of the things I admire about him.
What was really moving for me, and like I said, I'm still new to Omar, his role on The Wire, but I've never been so drawn to someone in such a short amount of time. I heard him in an interview talk about this documentary, and what he was saying was that he was so taken aback by the remorse that these kids felt for what they did, right? They made a mistake, and how the system wasn't allowing them to give them the opportunity to correct that wrong, right? And he said that he wouldn't be where he is if he wasn't given a second chance. And that was just so powerful for me, and it moved me so much so that and that was just from a 5-minute interview, right? Now, so often we see roles for Black men in TV and movies that are limited, and they conform to stereotypes. And you mentioned that roles Michael played were about the reality and the humanity of the Black male experience. Why do you think that was important to him, and why do you think that is important now?
I think it was important to him. We can only interpret what we take away from the roles that he's played. And I can say, from watching him on screen, from Lovecraft Country to The Wire to Boardwalk Empire, he has portrayed characters that we don't often see on screen. And even with Omar, right, to be a queer, a gay, gangster, essentially. He was sort of this, this like con artist who kind of worked and navigated his way with his own moral code in a way that no one else really did. But he brought depth and complexity to his character that wasn't portrayed at the time, at least not in films and shows that portrayed cops versus criminals, right? And really just showcased the plight of Black Americans at that time. So for him to bring that intention and integrity to roles like that, and to really display how vulnerable he could be and bring the depth. Because at first, when he was hired for the Wire, he wasn't meant to be a recurring character, right? But David Simon, the creator of the show, sort of fell in love with the authenticity that he brought to his character, that he became a regular and a standout character, to the point where people were calling him Omar in the streets, right? And he would always return back to the projects he came from to give back and to reconnect with characters there, or with people there, to build his character on the show, and to really showcase the reality of what that experience was like. But he borrowed from experiences that he knew and was shared from his cousin, who was a queer Black man, right? And some of the queer characters he played, and talking about the plight of HIV and the impact that had on his family in particular, and how he brought that to screen. He talked about his nephew Dominic and race in the system, and how that inspired his role, both in The Wire and also in The Night Of, which is another show that he was in. And so he's pulled from people in his life in really powerful and personal ways to, again, expand the scope of how we look at Black men on screen. And really one of a kind. He was one of a kind in doing that. And we truly lost a legend too soon. And I hope that people take the time to look back and reflect on his work and admire the ways he broke the lens and the scope of how Black men are portrayed in particular, in a way only he knew how. So may he rest in peace.
Well, what it is, it was an incredible opportunity for you to sit in the same space as this beloved actor and activist, Lilly. Thank you so very much. Head of Digital Content for Rebel Girls and Friends, again, Lilly Workneh. Thank you so much. Thanks. Coming up, the state of Texas planned to carry out an execution tonight, but was delayed pending appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll tell you more after the break.